Well, hey, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of ShipTalk. I'm very excited to be joined today by Joni, who's a co-founder at a DevSecOps firm called StackHawk. But Joni, for the listeners who actually don't know who you are, shame on them, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and a little bit of your background?
Yeah, happy to. So I'm Joni Klippert. Thanks for having me and thanks for listening. I'm the CEO and co-founder of StackHawk, as you mentioned. Our mission is to put application security in the hands of software engineers and help automate a lot of the process of finding bugs or vulnerabilities in your code. Before this, I worked at a company called DevOps as the VP of product, and I've been building software for software engineers largely in the DevOps ecosystem for about 12 years now. So happy to dig in and share a little more.
Awesome. Yeah. And really intrigued by your experience because I think you've been building products in the space pretty much for as long as the space existed, pseudo or now into the mainstream. So let me start with this. So how did you get into the DevOps product space? You've been probably one of the longest careers I see it in this particular product space. But how did you get into it at the beginning?
It's actually kind of funny. During my MBA program, I was studying entrepreneurship and some marketing, but I was really interested in the capital markets. And so I took a VCPE law class. And I got to meet some of the folks from the Foundry Group, which is a local venture capital firm in Boulder, and just learned a lot more about the space. I would call myself at the time a tech enthusiast. I have no technical background, but Boulder just had this awesome tech community, startup community that I started being a part of during that MBA program. And when I graduated, all I knew I wanted was to work for a Foundry-backed startup on Pearl Street. That's not very strategic, I guess, but I was like, hey, I love this space. I want to learn more about it. And I was doing a lot of research on companies. I had an idea of where I wanted to work. And that founder actually said, hey, I don't have a spot for you at this company, but I'm on the board of another company in town called Standing Cloud. And I think you have a really good skill set for them, which was they were building this highly technical product and working on taking it to market. And I was really specializing in customer development. So understanding the problem domain and making sure we were building products and can inform from the customer the type of products that this company might need. And what's funny is when I joined that company, the CEO said, Joni, I think you're going to need to learn to be a little bit more technical. And I said, well, what do you mean? I have like a Twitter account and a blog. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. And this company, this is before Amazon was just like the 1,000-pound gorilla in the room of cloud computing. There were tons of cloud providers that existed at the time. And this company had really smart technology in that we could programmatically deploy, 100 different open source applications on any cloud provider. So you could say, I want Drupal on SoftLayer in this area in Texas, and we would deploy all of that for you.
Ooh.
So in order to understand this job, I spent 3 years going to cloud conferences, all the different coding language conferences, and really immersing myself. It was like grad school part 2 in this world of technology. And at one point, somebody asked me if I was a systems administrator, and that was like the nicest thing anybody has ever said to me because I was just like faking it till I could make it, right? So that's how I ended up in tech and just really immersing myself. But then in product, it was really about understanding technology, which was great, but really immersing myself in what are the problem domains and how do we really uncover what the pain is in any given area and work to create a solution to solve it. So that's where I found my home.
That's perfect. I mean, I'm really impressed with that. One, it was extremely precise. You had a specific street that you wanted to work on. It's usually like the opposite, like when buying a house, like I have to live in this neighborhood. You're not even down to the street, but you were down to like Pearl Street, right? I guess.
Well, to be fair, it was on Walnut, but it's fine. It was 1 block away. And it was just it was such a vibrant town. It was so much fun. There were just tech startups all up and down that strip, and I just wanted to be a part of it. That's all I knew at the time.
Oh yeah, that's awesome. Just for the listeners out there, like the greater Denver, Boulder area is so awesome. I gave a talk at DevOps Days, Boulder, remember Denver, sorry.
Yeah.
DevOps Days Rockies is the official name. In 2018, my talk was at 10 in the morning, and I was joking with the organizer if I could get a beer. He brought me a beer. I'm like, it's early. He's like, it's Colorado. I'm like, I love Colorado. What a great place. So I had a beer on stage with me during my talk.
That's awesome.
Another story for another day, though. That's awesome. Like, I think, just whittling that down, like, David, you were able to have stuff that everyone struggles with. You had precision of vision, and you had a lot of grit. You stuck with it, going to like something that you were completely new in, and you go for years going to conferences and learning more. Like, that is a skill that and determination that very few people have. But I think it's just kind of like expanding upon that now. Like, it can, that particular grit and determination can expand to anything, right? So maybe the flavor du jour today is DevOps or engineering efficiency. Who knows what the flavor du jour of the day, my favorite French word, is in the next 5 years. And I think there's a lot we can distill on generics that, hey, you know what, if you have to learn something completely new, just really stealing Joni's framework here, what does it actually look like? It's usually just an uneasy feeling anytime you do anything new, but you're able to map it pretty successfully. So, okay, we can say that for a couple more minutes. But okay, once you were at that particular cloud startup, for those who don't have Joni's LinkedIn in front of them, you ascended to the heights. You're a VP level at VictorOps. Like, maybe take us from your first startup to just any sort of anecdotal information. What was it like continuing to climb in that ascent?
Yeah, sure. That first company was great. Like I mentioned, I got to learn a lot, cut my teeth, and I had an investor once say, a good career move is to have somebody pay you to learn something that you have no business being paid to learn. Like, I had relatively little to offer, other than just like hunger and thirst to learn more and share that input with the company. But by the time that 3 years had passed, I'd amassed quite a bit of technical knowledge. I learned a lot about how software was built and how companies thought about building software. So when I had the opportunity to work at VictorOps, they were a really young company. I was the first non-engineering hire, right? So it's 8 dudes in a room writing code plus me. And my job was to partner up with the CEO and go beat the streets. I had a really big network, and we had to figure out how close this product was to launch. What competitors did people use to VictorOps? Why did they like them? Why did they not like them? PagerDuty had been around for a little while, but it hadn't really innovated at that point. And honestly, every once in a while, you'd still hear people carrying like a literal pager, which was kind of funny. But at that company, I came to a crossroads where Todd was like, hey, we're going to build out this leadership team really quickly, and I want to talk to you about how you're going to grow your career. And at that point, it was really, in making a decision kind of where to head, I knew what it felt like to not own the product roadmap and to have to ask to get things included in the roadmap. And that's the one thing that I wanted to own, because I was going to dedicate all of my time and energy to figuring out how to make this company successful and what we needed to build to meet the needs of the market. And he gave me that role, right? He trusted in me to do that job. And it was awesome. We had a great team, so much fun building that company, growing it from just bringing the product to market through, it was about 150 people and an acquisition by Splunk in 2018. And that was a really fun ride.
Awesome. Yeah. And it's always interesting, right? Like, starting early, there's always like wearing multiple hats, and just I like that story that you were the first non-technical hire. I mean, I've argued that you were a technical hire, just focusing on a different part of the problem stack.
Not hands-on keys in that way. We'll say that.
The old adage I like to say: computers are easy, people are hard. Understanding
That's
us
right.
is extremely difficult. In fact,
That's right.
the computers didn't make us; we made them. Don't let them take advantage of you. So that's what I tell people. but going just kind of diving into that, the one more click down. It's okay. So part of like being, it might be a little tactical. It's and this then we'll get into how the genesis of your current place, StackHawk. I was talking to one of our product managers yesterday, and that maybe I might be interested in being a product manager one day. So, but one of the illusions is there's, as a product manager, there's no more escalation past you in the product. Like it is, you're the say all end all. And how do you, so just this might be more intrinsic, how do you deal with all the gray? Like if I see that you navigated the career so excellently, as a final point of escalation, or if you are, how do you determine making a decision? Extremely open-ended question here.
You mean like with the product roadmap?
Well, with the roadmap or anything about the product, right? So like it could be the product, it could be the roadmap, it could be a company level decision. You have an excellent framework, so maybe I can extract it a little bit, the Joni secret sauce on hard decisions.
It's honestly not clean. At one point, as the company was growing and I was trying to help younger team members understand what product is, I called it product stew. And there was a slide of like 50 inputs that come into your decision-making framework from, who is the feature for? Why is that strategic? How hard is it to build? Like there's so much, like, what's the competitive landscape like? Like, if you're a little ADD or like can think about a lot of things at the same time, like maybe product is a good thing for you, but it is very like multivariate, complex decision making that you ultimately have to figure out the best use of your resources to achieve a business goal. So while it's kind of messy and you end up in rooms looking like a beautiful mind, like trying to figure out how to best optimize all these ideas with limited resources, at the end of the day, it's really simple. Is your leader, your CEO, and the people they report to, their board, there are objectives that company has to meet, right? And at any given time, especially in early stage startups, it's what I can speak to the best. You're fighting for the next round, you're fighting for market traction. And at any point, there's going to be a metric or a handful of metrics that need to improve in order to achieve that goal, right? Your ARR, your annual contract value is too low. This isn't interesting to me. Is the market big enough, right? Like there are a bunch of questions we have to answer. And there is a world, Todd used to say, it feels like there are a lot of decisions to make here, but it's not really, like it's clear. Like there's one choice. Like this is what we have to do in order to hit the target. And then you just optimize your resources to do that. And so product can feel complex, but at the end of the day, you're trying to solve one of a handful of business problems and meet the needs of your customers. And once you focus on that, decisions get a lot easier. So that might have been a non-answer answer. It is still perfect. Complex, but that's how I think about it.
That was absolutely perfect. It was like, it's one thing is just even admitting or articulating that there's 50 sources of information. You get competing priorities all the time, right? Like, and it's that the higher you go into organization, the more competing priorities you're going to have to kind of manage. That was actually as eloquent as I ever heard it. So,
okay, well, thanks.
As an aside, as a secret, I don't tell the listeners, this is actually an hour of me getting career coaching for free. So surprise, listeners, this is usually what it is. It's like, I know I don't have to pay Joni for her expertise. I get asking for it. So,
my pleasure.
Awesome. Okay, so just battle tested with the startups there. I think so. Kind of making another kind of abstract, but leading us right now into your current venture, which is StackHawk, is like any new technology, or I would say a crypto space. It can be from starting a new department in let's say an organization. For example, a lot of the listeners here, their DevOps organization was not around 5 years ago, right? Or even take it 10 years. The most sophisticated people 10 years ago, the majority of people 5 years ago. There might be a few lone wolves out there, like we still don't have one. But it's similar to carving out a new department. I mean, even more so, more special is carving out a new company, new space. What kind of led you to make StackHawk, right? And so this is a newer up and coming space for listeners of DevSecOps. But what led you and your group of founders to say, hey, I think we can carve something out here.
Yeah. So after the acquisition, I kind of felt a fork in the road for me, which was, do I work on building my career in a larger organization, or do I start something new? And my heart was like crying for those days of the 8 dudes in a room. And I shouldn't say dudes because that's not like the ideal, but it's like this great time where there's a handful of people who believe in something that are working really hard to make it real. And that's what I had grown my career in, was super early stage startups. And I'm a builder, and I knew that's what I needed to do, but I didn't have a plan. I just left. So I was like, okay, I know this is the time, because as much as it can be enticing to wear golden handcuffs, time is the most valuable thing that you have, right? It's the most limited resource. And so for me, it was time to take the risk. I had built the right relationships. I had built a lot of domain knowledge, and I knew the right thing would come if I just took the jump. So I left. And honestly, I researched a company completely out of domain. And those who know me really well laugh at me, and they are like, that was just therapy for you, because I love solving complex problems. So I just go interview a bunch of people about problems in that space. It was like in the hourly, optimizing hourly workers. Like, it was had nothing to do with technology other than I had a sense of what I was going to build if I found that was a real problem. And I was talking to one of my mentors, and she's like, Joni, what are you doing? Like, you've amassed this knowledge in DevOps and how software is built over years. Like, why wouldn't you use that competitive advantage? And I think I just needed to take a minute and breathe in something new, feel something new for a little bit. And that was only, it was only really 3 months from when I left when I started a new company. So that was a tiny period, to be clear. But I started researching the security space. And with DevOps, there are different trends that they're like half-lifing in terms of how long it's taking for them to catch on, right? So Agile kind of took a long time, right? It was like 10, 15 years before people really understood Agile and were practicing it. And then with DevOps, cloud computing really kicked that off, right? But it was like, we don't want system administrators to be the bottleneck anymore to deploying code. And so like a whole bunch of tooling and processes changed so that businesses could meet the demand of their customers. And obviously, like, the rise of mobile, like, we want features, we want them now. So every company became a technology company. And these patterns were very clear. So the place we were playing in at VictorOps was, hey, there used to be like a network operations center. I mean, I'm sure companies still have them, but it was the ops people and your devs, and they didn't really like each other because devs would throw code over the wall on Friday at 3 p.m. And then some other person's responsible for making that shit run, right? Like, over the weekend, they're getting paged because it's not running. And the thing that we believed is the code is changing so fast that in order to really minimize downtime or maximize uptime, if there's an issue that your monitoring systems are telling you about, you need to be able to route that directly to the person who changed the code. The trend in security is moving even faster than DevOps originally was moving, because we've totally changed how we build software. The tooling is there, the processes are there. Every company, either they're born of the internet or they're undergoing like major digital transformation at this point. And it's a foregone conclusion that you have to build software differently in order to be competitive in market. And security was just left behind, right? Like, I would go to DevOps Days Enterprise, and there were security folks there, and they're like, hey, hi, I am here to learn because I don't understand how we're going to keep these new systems safe. I have no idea. And then you'd ask them a little bit about their processes. And it was like, well, before you can deploy, I need you to log into the system and click 2,000 boxes that tell me that the shit's safe. And it's like, there's like, no one has time to do this. This is so inefficient. So in researching the security space, what came to be was really this idea that same talk track, right? Like, we are changing code so fast this idea that, and at the time I was researching this idea around pen testing, and that's not what we built. I think people should get pen tests. But this notion that people evaluate the security of their software annually or a handful of times a year by a security team or maybe a third-party consultant that evaluates the code while it's in production. So you've shipped bugs to production. And then they, 6 months later, they find a bunch of issues and throw it over the wall to devs. And I'm like, this is insane. This is so inefficient. And so I spent time really understanding the application security market and where the holes were, where the cultural challenges are, just like we had them with DevOps, and several of them. Where do they live in security? And break that down and then figure out what's wrong with the tooling. And I'll stop talking now, but it led me there. And I think what built a lot of confidence was I knew the space and I knew that this was really important to build. And it wasn't that hard of a problem. Like if you understand software engineering, there's a very clear problem to be solved. So that really came out in the research. And then meeting my co-founders, we were able to put together an awesome team to go tackle this problem.
Awesome. Yeah, totally. Great strategy roadmap there. Like, absolutely right. Fixing something in production is like magnitudes of time more expensive than fixing it early. Also, going back to the human, most likely the engineer who wrote that feature, by the time the auditor, like the PwCs or Deloittes of the world find it, they're long gone off that project. And then the remedy information also, like full disclosure, I took a look at StackHawk stuff. So, pseudo familiar with it. Like that remedy information is extremely hard to get because then it's like two people who don't know, like, okay, what do I do with the findings? Like, what do you want me to do with it? Like Mr. and Mrs. Software Engineer, let's call Mr. and Mrs. AppSec Engineer. We don't know. To go, oh boy, now like the clock is ticking because the audit findings are there and like your remediation period's there. Then you're blow past remediation there, depending on what kind of audit you're under. It's just a big cycle. So okay, awesome.
Yeah.
Founding StackHawk there to help solve that. Another. This would be the more human question again. It's kind of more of a psychological, how do you do it type of question. So I had the ability to talk to someone who was very big in the open source community. Like she founded several large open source foundations, or she founded two of them actually. And also going back to one of the DevOps executives. But it all boiled down to how do you convince people, like how do you build vitality, right? So the question for the foundation founders, like, well, if you had a new open source project, how do you get people to contribute? And she had hey, it's actually very human centric. Same thing with how do you, grow your department in a new space. But, I think you represent the excellent crossroads here. What I think most entrepreneurs, would want to hear. It's just very in a 2-minute masterclass crash course from Joni. Just how do you get people to get interested in anything? Blank slate.
Wow.
What's the secret sauce? These are hard questions, I know. Yeah, it's just like, but just why people? How do people get interested? Like,
yeah, I mean, it's like, what people first are you talking about? Because you got to get a lot of people interested.
See,
right?
That's a good start. There you go. So focus even what people. Good to start. Yeah.
I guess the first thing is come up with a hypothesis of a problem that you believe exists in the world, and then validate it furiously. Like look at it from a lot of angles, try to poke holes into it, and listen to the words people use as they describe the problem. And then go use those words and talk about it to somebody else, right? And you start pattern matching, and it's like, oh, it's super clear what this problem is. And for me, even though I'm not an engineer and I'm new in the security space, you can start telling the story as though you've lived it, right? If you hear it 50 times and they're overlapping in so many different ways, it starts to create a life of its own. And you can really clearly articulate the problem space and who has those problems and why it's important to fix it, right? So storytelling is a really big piece, like listening and then being able to share that story such that people believe in it and then believe in the vision on how to fix it. And then there's, your personal story. So for me, I mean, my co-founders, one I knew really well, Ryan, whom you've met. I hired him at VictorOps. He's brilliant and, very analytical, awesome at data, awesome at like inbound marketing generation, like super, super smart guy. And we knew each other well. We knew how we worked. And so really that was an easier, quote, sell. Like he just had to believe it was the right time for him. Right. But then also there was my co-founder, Scott Gerlach, who's amazing. He was the CISO at SendGrid for a handful of years as they were bought by Twilio. And before that, he led security at GoDaddy for 10 years. So he had really deep domain. And I had to convince Scott that I was the person he should jump on board with because we were going to get this company funded. He had to believe that I had enough experience to run this business and I had the right people around me as mentors and advisors to be able to do it. And there's a huge leap of faith, right? So there's sort of is the story real? Does that feel real? And does our solution to it, does it feel like a problem we want to go tackle? And then is this a person I want to tackle this problem with? Like, do I believe in them as a leader? And do I believe that they have the right connections and capabilities to move this forward? And that same kind of second part of belief extends to your investors, right? Like I had built really strong relationships with my investors over time, working at other companies. And, the Foundry Group really stepped in and made a bet that I could do this. But also when they look at the people you hire, it's like as a CEO, your most important job is getting top talent. And if I can convince them that this is a problem worth taking on, then your investors look at you and think, okay, I think this person has enough domain and enough influence to be able to build the right team to get this thing off the ground. And then you have customers, right? So there's building a solid product based on a vision that was born out of research, right? We listened to our people in the market about what their problems were. And then along the way, product being kind of where I'm born out of, you constantly validate your assumptions with people in the market and find those, super early adopters that are willing to touch your product and play with it before it's even a thing. Like we built on top of Zap and built the scanning capability before we had any UI. And there were so many awesome people that believed in our vision that were willing to test it and give us feedback along the way, that it led us to a strong product that we could really stand behind and go out there and get other users to use. And like you mentioned earlier, that's a lot of relationship building. So there's a lot of trust and, taking the leap, but also building strong relationships over time.
That's as perfect as an answer I've ever heard. It's computers are easy, humans are hard. And that was very eloquent, right? Like showing that even though there's a lot of gray in there or there's a lot of unknowns, it's just being perseverant to the problem. That's no system can teach you that, right? It's all kind of comes down to the person. That was perfect. Yeah, I know, kind of a very abstract question to ask. It's the
sorry I broke it down into sections.
That was really good.
I could understand it.
Natural product manager here. Yeah, it's coming out, showing itself, Joni. So that's awesome. You saved me $900 for an hour of executive coaching. So thank you so much, Joni, for that. So.
My pleasure.
Last question. I always like to wrap the podcast up with one line. So again, thank you so much for coming on. If intrinsic question here again, if you were take it back to when you were graduating undergrad, and if let's say you were walking down the street with undergrad Joni and current Joni ran into your previous self the day of graduation, what would be any advice you would tell yourself as you threw your cap in the air?
That's such a good question. And I'm like, how do I make sure I answer this as intelligently as
Don't
possible?
go to jail. What don't eat? You're allergic to avocados. I don't know. Like it could be any.
You're allergic to avocados. That's hysterical.
Stop eating.
I think it would be trust your instincts and don't let anybody tell you no. Like I've largely lived my life in that I never want to work in a place where somebody gets to tell me like when I can take vacation and what I can do. And and just believe that you're worthy, right? Like this is a terrible answer to your question, but also
Perfect.
just stay hungry. Like I always believed that I could figure anything out. And I've never been the smartest person in the room. I've never been the smartest student. But with enough curiosity, it's possible just to figure it out, and trust that the path will lead you where you're supposed to go. I was never the person that in a job interview, somebody would say, where do you see yourself in 5 years? And I had a very good answer. I never had a good answer. I'm like, the internet was hardly born when I was in school. What do you mean? Like, our lives are changing so fast. But I always worked for people who inspired me and who I knew could teach me something new. And I always wanted to learn from people that I would want to emulate in the future. And I was very fortunate to build a lot of those relationships over time and have a lot of people believe in me that I would sit in their seat one day. And I think a lot of other people believed it before I did. And then I just had to take the jump. So that was a very meandering road to the answer to your question.
I mean, that's a great answer. Yeah. Like, I want to start looking for seats I can sit in now. Like, Joni's inspired me to find seats. So, very awesome. So, if folks want to learn more about StackHawk, what's the best way to get engaged with StackHawk?
Yeah, I mean, just come to the website, stackhawk.com. Check it out. Like, we're a very transparent security company. So our docs are online. You can start a trial. You can play with our technology. And we also have a team of humans here that provide outstanding support to people who are even just curious about the product. And they're all very technical. So if you want to learn more about the domain, there's a lot of resources that are available to you through StackHawk. And if you want to get your hands on the keys and play a little bit with some application security as a software engineer, it's a really nice place to start.
Cool. Well, Joni, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.